What do you do when your own family sues you for a life you actually lived? When the people who raised you call you a liar in open court, and the courtroom believes them? Tamsin Lakash earned the rank of colonel in U.S. Cyber Command. She served in silence, led in the shadows, and protected more than she was ever allowed to say. But when her parents dragged her to trial, claiming she faked her entire career, she didn't speak, she didn't beg, she stood. Because the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just walks into the room and salutes. I never thought I'd hear my full name read aloud in a courtroom, not like this. Tamsin Elise Lakach, the clerk said, voice echoing against the marble walls, charged with falsifying military credentials and impersonating a United States officer. My name didn't even sound like mine anymore. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, not from air conditioning, but from the way not a single person on the left side of the aisle looked at me. That was my family's side. My mother, a retired district judge, sat up front in a perfectly tailored suit, hands folded like she was presiding over a board meeting. My father, the former CEO of Lakach Banking Group, wore a navy pocket square and an expression that belonged in a shareholders' briefing. And my brother Morgan, he leaned back like he was watching a rerun of a show he already knew the ending to. They weren't here for the truth. They were here for the narrative. The judge adjusted his glasses. The opposing attorney stood, smooth and sharp. Your Honor, we intend to prove that Miss Lakach never earned the military title she claims, that she has misrepresented her service history to gain federal recognition, social status, and, most concerning, access to privileged networks. My lawyer, Sarah Devine, shifted beside me. Her hand hovered just above mine. I didn't take it. Because if I had to convince a room full of strangers that I belonged, after everything I gave, then I'd already lost. And then, the courtroom door creaked open. Everyone turned. A man walked in, tall, calm, gray at the temples, dress blues, medals on his chest catching the light. He didn't say a word, just walked, slow and sure, straight down the aisle like a stone dropped in still water. The room held its breath. He stopped right in front of me, looked me in the eyes, and saluted. Colonel Lakach, he said, permission to speak on your behalf. Gasps, real ones. My mother's hands flinched. My father's pen dropped. Morgan blinked like the scene didn't compute. And me? I finally breathed. Because I knew exactly who he was. Retired General Rowan King, the only man alive who could vouch for what happened in Reykjavik. But I hadn't called him. I never sent a message, never asked for help, because I didn't think anyone from that chapter would ever be allowed to speak. Not after what we went through, not after the classification seals, not after the silence that followed. But there he was, in front of my accusers, in front of the state of Colorado, and in front of a country that doubted me. He stood beside me, not for evidence, but for honor. The judge cleared his throat. We'll hear from him in due time, he said. For now, let's proceed. I sat back in my chair, spine straight. They wanted to strip my title, erase 20 years in a single motion. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just walks in the room and stands beside you without needing permission. I was 19 when I told them. It was a Sunday, late spring, the kind of morning where the sun feels polite and the coffee tastes like home. The acceptance letter from Princeton sat unopened on the breakfast table. My parents already knew what it was. They'd practically built my entire childhood for that moment. Model UN, fencing, legacy scholarships, all pieces of the perfect Lakach daughter. Across from me, my father adjusted his watch, like the news was just another minor delay in his afternoon. My mother didn't speak at all. She just blinked, slow and deliberate, like I'd told her I was joining a traveling circus. I enlisted, I said. Their silence was louder than any argument. Cyber Command, I added, softer now. They offered me a direct track, signal analysis, defense ops. My father scoffed. People like us don't enlist, Tamsin. We build institutions, we advise presidents, we don't take orders, we write them. That sentence would follow me for years, like smoke in my lungs. My mother finally spoke, just one word. Why? I didn't have a speech prepared, no rebellion, no manifesto, just truth. Because I want to do something that matters, without needing anyone's last name to open the door. My brother Morgan chuckled from his corner. He hadn't looked up from his phone the entire time. So now you're going to disappear into a basement with a bunch of code monkeys and call it patriotism? That was the last morning we all sat at the same table. They didn't come to my basic training graduation, they didn't write, they didn't send care packages. And when my name showed up 5 years later in a classified brief that leaked to the press about a cyber operation that intercepted a digital arms deal in Southeast Asia, my mother sent me a one-line email. We saw the article, hope this phase gives you clarity. Phase. As if serving my country was some emotional haircut I'd grow out of. But it wasn't a phase. It was a crucible. I deployed, I commanded, I earned my clearances, one grueling briefing at a time. No family flag to hide behind, no legacy points, just results. They didn't see the 20-hour simulations, the ethical questions that kept me up at night, the silence when something went wrong and you couldn't even tell your reflection why. They didn't see the faces of those who burned out and disappeared before they hit 30. But I did. And I stayed. Not because it was easy, because it was right. Still, every time I got promoted, every ribbon I was authorized to wear, I thought of my parents. Of my father's voice, we build institutions. Of my mother's silence, polished and cold. And I'd wonder, what is the cost of doing what you believe in if the people you love think it's a lie? There was a night in Berlin, years later. I was sitting in a cafe after a debrief. The snow hadn't started yet. And I watched a couple laugh over soup in the window across the street. I remember thinking, they don't know my name. They don't know what I saved this week. And maybe that's the point. Maybe serving isn't about being known. Maybe it's about doing the right thing, even when it earns you nothing. And even when your own family forgets you ever existed, they called it Operation North Halo. But most of us just called it Reykjavik. It wasn't supposed to make headlines. It wasn't even supposed to exist. And yet, it's the one thing I'll never forget, the mission that changed everything, and the reason I can't prove a damn word of it. It was January. Iceland was colder than anything I'd ever felt, but the cold wasn't the problem. The breach was. An Allied database had been compromised. Key personnel, live asset trails, deployment matrices. If that data went public, entire networks would unravel. People would die. Our job was to find the leak, contain the threat, and secure the system. But what we walked into wasn't a threat, it was a trap. The moment we crossed the threshold of the comm center outside Reykjavik, we lost signal. Power flickered, screens blinked red. Then the system locked, and someone on the inside had already triggered the wipe. The general in command, Brigadier Rowan King, was standing right beside me when the explosion hit the far wall. I remember how strange it felt, not fear, just clarity. The kind you don't get sitting in strategy meetings or skimming dossiers. He went down hard, head bleeding, unconscious. And just like that, I was the highest-ranking conscious officer in the room. No orders, no backup, no time. I took control. I don't remember yelling. I remember moving, fast, focused. I rerouted the network to an analog system, reinitiated encryption by hand, grabbed a sidearm and dragged King into the bunker hallway while the rest of the team scrambled to suppress the breach. The fire never reached us. The enemy didn't either. But if I hadn't made that call, if I'd hesitated or deferred, the entire operation would have collapsed, with us inside it. We made it out, every single one of us. But what happened next was quieter. The brass flew in under civilian cover. The logs were sealed. We were debriefed, decontaminated, and separated. 3 days later, I was flown to an underground facility in Belgium and handed a document labeled Confidential Directive 49Z. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement so tight, it might as well have been tattooed to my bones. You saved lives, King said, still bruised, still limping. But this mission never happened. I nodded. Because it wasn't about credit, it never had been. But something changed that day. It wasn't just that I had taken command. It was that I had felt what real command costs. Not the medals, not the briefings, but the weight of knowing every decision you make could bury someone, and no one will ever thank you for it. Weeks later, a package arrived at my safe house. Inside, a single coin from King's personal commendation collection. Engraved on the back, quiet command, loud results. I never showed that coin to anyone, not until the lawsuit, not until they said I faked it all. You know what they never understand about Black Ops? They think silence is a lack of proof. But silence is the proof. It means you did something that mattered enough to bury. That's what happened in Reykjavik. And I'd go back tomorrow. Even if no one ever knew I was there. The envelope came by courier. No return address, no warning. Just a folded summons stamped by the state of Colorado. When I opened it, I thought it was a mistake. Plaintiffs, Judith and Charles Lockach. Cause, alleged falsification of military credentials, fraudulent misrepresentation, reputational harm to family legacy. My parents weren't just questioning my service. They were suing me for inventing it. I stared at the paper so long the ink started to blur. Then I folded my uniform jacket over the back of the chair and sat in silence. They didn't just want to discredit me. They wanted to erase me, and they knew exactly where to strike. My father always believed in presentation. His motto was, "Appearances are policy." My mother? She didn't believe in second chances, only second drafts. She'd rewrite reality if it made the dinner table more palatable. This lawsuit? It wasn't just about the military, it was a PR campaign disguised as legal action. And leading the charge was my brother, Morgan. He'd just launched his bid for city council, a polished, smiling heir to the Lockach brand. And apparently there was no room in that campaign for a sister with a sealed service record and a habit of refusing photo ops. 3 days after the summons, he gave a podcast interview titled, "When Family Identity Goes Too Far." I listened once. He said things like, "She always had to be the center of attention. Even in grade school, if I won a science fair, she had to invent a mission to Mars. This Colonel persona? Just another chapter in her novel of reinvention." I closed the app, deleted it. They weren't going after facts, they were going after my character. The lawyer they hired, Eleanor Vance, specialized in reputational warfare. She'd torn down senators, generals, even a few CEOs. She didn't argue evidence, she curated doubt. In her first statement, she said, "We believe Tamsin is struggling with delusional identity constructs rooted in unresolved family trauma." Translation, she's crazy, don't trust a thing she says. I wasn't shocked. This wasn't the first time my family had tried to rewrite me. When I refused to wear heels to my scholarship interview, my mother said, "No one takes a girl in boots seriously." When I enlisted, my father told me, "Real power doesn't need a uniform." When I graduated top of my cyber warfare class, they sent no letter, no call, just silence. Now that silence was being weaponized. And the cruelest part? They knew I couldn't fight back. I couldn't unseal my records. I couldn't parade my commendations. I couldn't risk the lives of people who were still operating in places no map dares show. So instead of mounting a defense, I stood still. Not because I was surrendering, but because some truths are too sacred to drag through court transcripts. Sarah, my attorney, tried to get me to settle. "Tamsin, they're not after prison time. They want a retraction, a public apology. Maybe, just maybe, it ends here." I shook my head. If I lie now, I never earned the rank, and I never deserved the silence that followed it. She looked at me for a long moment, then closed her binder. "Then we fight." And fight we did, not with flash drives or affidavits, but with restraint, with discipline, with every quiet truth they underestimated. They wanted me erased, but I'd spent my whole career making sure the invisible were never forgotten, and I wasn't about to let them write me out of my own life. The night before final arguments, I sat alone in my apartment. My jacket was draped over the kitchen chair. The ribbon bar rested quietly on the table. And in front of me, an unopened envelope, 5 years old. Return address blacked out, postmarked from Germany. I hadn't had the courage to open it until now. It was from him, General Rowan King, the man I'd carried out of that hallway in Reykjavik, the one I'd last seen bruised, bleeding, and grateful. My hands shook as I peeled back the seal. Inside, one sheet of thick paper written in sharp, blocky pen. "To the officer who saw through the smoke, you didn't just save lives. You saved what the uniform is supposed to mean." No signature, no flourish, just those words. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my inner coat pocket. Not as evidence, but as armor. The next morning, the courthouse smelled like wet concrete and burnt coffee. Reporters lined the steps like vultures with microphones. Inside, the gallery was packed. My parents looked confident, like they'd already won. Morgan flipped a pen between his fingers with the kind of smirk that says, "This ends today." The prosecution was ready. Their attorney stood with her usual smug precision. The judge looked toward my table. "Defense, do you have anything further before we proceed to closing?" Sarah, my lawyer, stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, we have one final witness." The room shifted. The prosecution snapped around. "Objection, the witness list was closed last week." Sarah didn't flinch. "He wasn't on the list, Your Honor, because we weren't sure he would come." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Name?" Then a voice from the back. "General Rowan King, United States Cyber Command, retired." Silence, pure and sharp. Every head turned. There he was. Dress blues, 4 stars on his shoulders, medals pinned like memories across his chest. He didn't walk fast, he didn't need to. He walked with purpose, with presence. The bailiff swore him in. The judge gave a subtle nod. "Proceed." King stood at the witness box and looked directly at the jury. "I led Operation North Halo. That operation remains classified due to its nature and international coordination. I cannot speak to the specifics, but I can speak to this." He turned, looked right at me. "During the breach, I was injured, unconscious, vulnerable. When I woke up, the team was secure, the data protected, and every life accounted for. That was not a miracle. That was Major Tamsin Lockash." He paused. "She assumed command under live threat. She rerouted systems blind. She carried me to safety, on a fractured leg, and she didn't ask for recognition." The jury didn't move. No one did. "I've written hundreds of recommendations. Only 6 use the phrase exceptional under fire. Hers was the 6th. Then he stepped down from the stand, walked toward me quietly, like he had nothing to prove. And right there, before the jury, the judge, the press, before my family who said I never existed, he stood tall, brought his hand to his brow, and saluted. "Colonel Lockach," he said, his voice steady, "it's an honor." I didn't blink, didn't breathe. I stood slowly and returned the salute. Thank you, sir. The courtroom didn't make a sound, not even the reporters. The judge cleared his throat. Court will recess for deliberation. But everyone in that room already knew. The case had ended before the judge ever called it. Not with documents, not with declarations. With one salute. And the truth no longer whispered, but witnessed. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. Unanimous. All claims dismissed. No evidence of fraud, no grounds for defamation. And in one final line, the judge said, "This court recognizes Colonel Tamsin Lokach's service as both lawful and honorable. The charges brought forth were not only unsupported, they were unjust." That word echoed inside me. Unjust. It wasn't just a legal win, it was a reclamation. Of my name, my rank, my voice. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun caught the edge of my uniform. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions I didn't answer. My family waited at the base of the stairs. Of course they did. My mother stepped forward first. Her heels clicked with careful intention. "Tamsin," she said softly, we were misinformed. We thought—" I stopped her. "You chose what to believe, you always did." She reached out, but I didn't take her hand. Behind her, my father stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "This didn't have to be public," he said, like a man losing control of a narrative. "You made it a spectacle." I met his eyes. "No, you made it a lawsuit. I made it a defense." Morgan stood off to the side, hands shoved in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the sidewalk. For once, he had nothing to say. "We're still family," my mother tried, one last reach. Her voice was shaking now. And I looked at her, really looked. The woman who told me to smile less assertively in interviews. The one who flinched when I wore boots to my own scholarship banquet. I thought of the judge's words again. Unjust. "I didn't lose a family today," I told her. "I just stopped pretending I ever had one." Then I walked away. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. And for the first time in years, the medal pinned to my chest felt like it belonged there. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address, just a name etched in careful script, R. King. Inside was a single photo. Me, mid-laugh, dust on my face, kneeling beside a young recruit, half buried in camouflage. On the back, in ink. She never needed noise. I framed it. Placed it on my desk at the military academy where I'd been invited to teach a seminar. Not on tactics, not on surveillance, but on judgment, on restraint, on honor when no one's watching. The first day, 20 cadets sat silently, unsure what to make of me. One girl stayed behind after class. Small frame, bright eyes, nervous hands. "My brother says I'm wasting my time here," she whispered, "that I'll never command anyone who listens." I looked at her, and I saw me. Before the scars, before the silence, before any courtroom. I opened my drawer, pulled out the old coin from Reykjavik, and pressed it into her palm. "Then command yourself," I said, "and the rest will follow." She nodded, like someone who just found an anchor in open water. And just like that, I understood. This was never about proving myself to them. It was about reclaiming what they tried to take. Not the rank, not the title. The truth. That night, I visited the memorial wall behind the chapel. No speeches, no press, just names etched in stone. I traced the ones I knew, left a small bouquet beneath one I didn't. The wind shifted. Not cold, not sharp. Just honest. And I realized something simple, something sacred. They tried to take my uniform, but I was never just a title. I was always a soldier. Even when I stood alone, even when I stayed silent, especially then. Because silence, when it carries truth, isn't weakness. It's command. Sometimes the loudest truth is the one you choose not to shout. Tamsin didn't fight back with anger. She didn't unseal secrets that were never hers to give. She stood still and let her silence carry the weight of everything she had lived. Because real strength isn't in proving yourself to the world. It's in refusing to betray what you know is right, even when the world turns its back. If you've ever felt invisible, doubted, or erased by the very people who should have stood beside you, this story is yours too. And maybe it's time you stopped asking for permission and started reclaiming what was always yours. Here on Sweet Revenge, Happy Ending, we tell the stories that start in betrayal, but end in power. If this one moved you, stay with us. There's more truth where that came from.